In March 1990, in Ozark, Alabama, a 22-year-old woman disappeared without warning, leaving behind a young daughter and a deeply concerned community. More than 25 years later, a shocking confession turned everything upside down and solved the cold case. On March 7, 1990, Tracey Harris suddenly disappeared from her home. There was no warning, no indication that she had planned to leave. For someone as consistent and caring as Tracey, vanishing without a trace was deeply out of character. Her ex-husband, Carl Harris, was the one who reported Tracey missing to the police, prompting the start of a formal investigation. The authorities began searching for the young mother, trying to piece together the last moments she was seen. The case quickly gained attention within the community, especially given the tense dynamics between Tracey and Carl that some had witnessed firsthand. Despite the lack of a formal abuse report, the investigators could not ignore the disturbing accounts from those who had stayed in the home. Tracey Harris was born in 1968 in Ozark, Alabama. She was married to Carl Harris, and together they had a daughter named Carolyn. Though the family appeared typical from the outside, there were hidden struggles behind closed doors. The relationship between Tracey and Carl began to deteriorate, marred by claims of abuse. Eventually, the couple separated due to the alleged abuse, yet Tracey continued living with Carl and their daughter in the same home. Her choice to stay might have stemmed from concern for her daughter or limited options, but whatever the reason, it placed her in an increasingly tense and dangerous environment. During this period, a woman named Dawn Beasley and her fiancé temporarily stayed with the Harris family. Their short stay exposed them to the reality of Tracey's life, frequent arguments, and Carl's explosive temper. According to them, the household was filled with tension, and Carl's anger was often directed at Tracey. On March 14th, exactly 1 week after Tracey vanished, the search came to a grim end. Her body was discovered in the Choctawhatchee River, located in Dale County, not far from her home. The recovery of her remains marked a devastating moment for her family and the small community that had hoped for a different outcome. An autopsy was conducted, and the findings painted a troubling picture. Tracey had both water and sand in her lungs, confirming that she had drowned. However, the medical examiner also found bruises and distinct markings on her neck, which were consistent with strangulation. This indicated that Tracey had been attacked prior to entering the water, suggesting that she may have been unconscious or incapacitated when she drowned. Adding to the disturbing nature of the case, Tracey was found naked from the waist up. Her clothing was discovered in a different location, separated from her body. Though the condition in which she was found raised suspicions of a possible indecent assault, the autopsy results showed no physical evidence to confirm such an act. The investigation then shifted into a new phase. Detectives began focusing on those closest to Tracey, retracing her final days and looking into her relationships. Carl Harris became a primary suspect in the case almost immediately after her body was found. The suspicions were not baseless, as more than a dozen individuals stepped forward to testify about Carl's violent behavior toward Tracey during their relationship. Given that Carl and Tracey were still living under the same roof at the time of her disappearance, the investigators believed that he was likely the last person to see her alive. As the investigation deepened, law enforcement began examining Carl's personal life in more detail. It was revealed that he had been involved with another woman during the time he was still living with Tracey. The discovery of a new romantic interest suggested a possible reason for wanting Tracey out of the picture, adding further weight to the suspicions surrounding him. Despite the mounting circumstantial evidence, no forensic evidence, such as DNA or fingerprints, could place him at the scene or link him to the disposal of Tracey's body. As a result, Carl was not arrested or formally accused at the time, and the case began to lose momentum. With no arrests and little progress, the case eventually went cold. It was not until 25 years later, in 2015, that the case saw renewed attention. The Ozark Police Department formed a cold case unit, aiming to revisit unresolved crimes with fresh eyes and updated investigative techniques. Among the cases they chose to reopen was Tracey Harris's. Investigators reviewed the original evidence, re-interviewed witnesses, and sought any overlooked details that might provide new insight into what had happened. Their efforts led to a major development. In September 2016, Carl Harris was finally arrested. As prosecutors prepared for Carl's trial in 2020, they uncovered a key piece of the case, a statement previously made by Dawn Beasley, the woman who stayed in the Harris home. However, when Dawn received a subpoena to testify, she made a startling decision. She contacted the prosecutors and declared that she could not, in good conscience, take the stand. In a dramatic turn, she informed them that Carl was not the man responsible for Tracey's demise. Dawn insisted that an innocent man was being prosecuted and revealed a shocking secret she had kept for 30 years. According to Dawn, on the very night Tracey's life was ended, a man named Jeffrey Beasley, her acquaintance, and a friend of the couple had confessed to the crime. Dawn said that Beasley admitted to the crime in a private conversation, revealing disturbing details that had haunted her ever since. Her decision to come forward at such a late stage shifted the course of the case entirely and upended the narrative that had surrounded Carl for decades. The impact of Dawn's confession was immediate and profound. Prosecutors, faced with a direct admission of guilt from another individual and the recanting of a key witness, dropped all charges against Carl just as his trial was about to begin. After years of being labeled the prime suspect, Carl was suddenly a free man, no longer burdened by the weight of the accusation that had followed him for over 25 years. Carolyn Aznavour said, "I knew my mom's life was ended. She was just 4 years old when her mother was taken from her. And then, as the years went on, I found out that it had to do with my dad." Carolyn also said that she does not have any memories of her mother. She said, "Family would always bring up stories about her, how sweet she was, how shy she was." Shortly after Dawn's revelation, investigators acted quickly. In January 2020, Jeffrey Beasley, then 54 years old, was arrested and formally charged. He was accused of both strangling and drowning the young woman. Beasley pleaded guilty and received a 30-year sentence. In August 2011, in Portland, Maine, a man's life was cut short when he was shot in the chest. As the investigation unfolded, the case grew cold and hope faded, leaving his loved ones in limbo for over a decade, until a surprising breakthrough turned the case on its head. Alin MacLean was born in 1970. At the age of 41, he was a longtime resident of South Portland, Maine, where he was well known and well liked by those around him. On August 1st, 2011, he was shot in the chest near the intersection of Massachusetts Avenue and Congress Street. Despite his critical injury, Alin managed to run toward Congress Street, desperate for help and clinging to life. His final moments were filled with urgency as he tried to reach someone, anyone, who might be able to save him. Witnesses nearby saw Alin in distress and rushed to his side. Several individuals attempted to assist him, but despite their efforts, Alin collapsed and lost his life at the scene before emergency personnel could intervene. Within moments, police authorities arrived at the scene, securing the area and beginning the preliminary steps of their investigation. Their aim was to understand whether the attack had been targeted, random, or a result of an altercation. The scene was treated with urgency and caution as the detectives began piecing together the timeline of Alin's final steps. Law enforcement appealed to the public for any additional information that could aid the investigation. They urged witnesses to come forward and encouraged residents or passers-by who may have seen or heard anything unusual that evening to speak up. The police continued their investigation into the crime, determined to find answers. However, as time went on, the case went cold. Then, in 2021, 10 years after the fatal shooting, there was a breakthrough. On August 9th, the Portland Police Department made a public announcement that reignited the case. The announcement revealed that Abdi Awad, who at the time was already serving a 25-year prison sentence for an unrelated crime, had been charged. Details surrounding how the investigators connected Awad to the case were not immediately released, but the charge represented a critical step forward. In 2011, shortly after the shooting, a witness recounted the harrowing moment that unfolded before her eyes. She said, "I heard a gunshot, and then I heard a man say, 'I am losing my life.' And he tried to cross the street and almost got hit by a car, collapsed on the sidewalk." The witness, visibly shaken by the trauma of that night, stayed with Alin in his final moments. She held his hand as he lay on the pavement, offering what comfort she could until he took his last breath. Her words painted a vivid picture of the fear and desperation Alin must have felt as he struggled to survive. More than a decade later, on September 5th, 2023, justice finally began to take form. Awad, then 37 years old, stood in court and pleaded guilty. The sentencing was emotional for the victim's family, who has been waiting for justice since their loved one was slain 12 years ago. Alin's daughter wrote in a statement read aloud in the courtroom that her father was a ray of sunshine and he lived his life to the fullest. While Awad has been behind bars for more than a decade, he and people closest to him said he was a changed man. Defense attorney Verna Parody said in his 24 years of being an attorney, he has never seen a defendant have so much support. Brandon Brown, a man formerly incarcerated with Awad, said, "Abdi is the most peaceful person that I know, and I know that that is hard to believe considering the mistakes that he has made as a young man. But I would also like to offer to the court that I made many mistakes as a young man too. However, regardless of how much Awad may have changed," Deputy District Attorney Jennifer Ackerman said, "Alin paid the ultimate price for Awad to turn his life around. As part of his sentence, Awad was given 30 years in prison, with all but 11 years suspended. In addition, he was sentenced to 4 years of probation following his release." A family member of Alin said, "This guy is going to get out in 11 years. It just does not seem like justice to me." While the full truth of his demise may never be known, justice has been served. Alin's memory will continue to live on in the hearts of those who loved him. On September 14th, 2011, in Fort Myers, Florida, Lisa Collins and Stephen Rios' lives were brutally ended in a cold and calculated act of violence. For over a decade, the case went cold, but in 2021, after years of silence, a breakthrough in the investigation brought long-awaited justice. On September 16th, 2011, the family members of 21-year-old Lisa Collins and 35-year-old Stephen Rios were concerned after not hearing from them. They then went to their residence located on East River Drive in Fort Myers. What they found inside the home was horrifying and unimaginable. The scene revealed the brutal reality of what had taken place just days earlier. Shocked and panicked, the family members wasted no time. They immediately contacted law enforcement to report the discovery. The police arrived at the scene promptly, moving quickly to secure the area and begin their investigation. The initial report from authorities confirmed that Stephen had been shot 3 times and Lisa was shot 8 times. Despite efforts to gather evidence, the investigation struggled to find a clear direction and eventually went cold. More than 11 years after the crime took place, a major development finally emerged in the long-dormant case. The renewed push came from a collaboration between the Fort Myers Police Cold Case investigators and the Cold Case Slaying Unit of the State Attorney's Office for the 20th Judicial Circuit. Working together, they revisited old evidence, re-interviewed witnesses, and re-examined every detail that had once gone overlooked or unanswered. Through their thorough investigation, the officials were finally able to develop probable cause that linked Amy Carroll Parks to the case. Her arrest took place on August 17, 2021. After years of freedom, she was finally taken into custody by authorities who had worked tirelessly to bring justice to the victims and closure to their families. Following her arrest, Parks chose to plead guilty to charges related to her involvement in the crime. She admitted to burglary of a dwelling and accessory after the fact. while she was not convicted of ending the lives of Lisa and Stephen. Her guilty plea acknowledged her role in the events that led to the demises. As a result of her plea, Parks was sentenced to a 5-year prison term. Further investigation by law enforcement uncovered a second suspect. The authorities determined that Amy's husband, Michael Parks, had also played a significant role in the crime. His name resurfaced during the continued examination of the case, and the police were able to gather enough evidence to take legal action against him as well. On October 27, 2022, Michael Parks was arrested and formally charged. He faced 2 counts of second degree with a firearm, 2 counts of third-degree felony, and 1 count of robbery with a firearm causing demise. Interestingly, at the time of his arrest for these charges, Michael Parks was already behind bars. He was serving time at Okaloosa Correctional Institution in Crestview, Florida, for an unrelated offense. In October 2023, Michael Parks was sentenced to 3 life sentences. While some closure is achieved, many questions still remain about their motives. For the families, the case continues to be a painful reminder, but the pursuit of truth and justice continues. In 1992, in California, a 14-year-old girl was struck by a stray bullet in El Monte, California, when gunfire erupted in a sudden drive-by shooting. Despite an initial investigation, the case quickly went cold, and for nearly 3 decades it remained an unsolved tragedy. Alin Garcia was born in 1978 in the sunny state of California. She grew up in a close-knit household surrounded by her loving family. On the night of November 21st, 1992, at around 9:15 p.m., 14-year-old Alin and her friend were walking along Mountain View Road in the city of El Monte. The area, though familiar, had a reputation for danger. As they neared the Little 5 Points liquor store, a known gathering spot for members of the El Monte Flores street gang, the atmosphere grew tense. Young men stood outside flashing gang signs at passing cars, a common but unsettling sight in that part of the city. Amid the noise and street activity, Alin stepped aside to use a nearby payphone. She lifted the receiver and began dialing, unaware of the danger that was rapidly approaching. As she made her call, 2 pickup trucks suddenly rolled into the parking lot. Without warning, the occupants of the trucks opened fire, targeting the group of gang members gathered near the store. The chaos was immediate and fatal. One of the young men affiliated with the gang was fatally shot in the hail of bullets. Tragically, so was Alin. A stray bullet struck her in the forehead as she stood at the payphone. The gunmen did not stop and they sped away, leaving behind a scene of bloodshed and panic. The payphone, which moments earlier connected Alin to her family, hung lifeless in the aftermath of the shooting. On the other end of that call was Alin's sister, Anna, who was just 15 years old at the time. Anna had been staying at their aunt's house that night. She said that she remembers picking up the phone when it rang, but cannot recall if Alin ever spoke or if she herself heard anything unusual. What she remembers clearly, however, is the moment the line went silent. The phone call suddenly ended. Confused but not alarmed, Anna hung up and went to bed, not realizing what had just happened to her sister. The next morning, Alin's family received the devastating call that would change their lives forever. They were summoned to the hospital, where doctors and investigators delivered the heartbreaking news. In the immediate aftermath of the tragedy, an investigation was launched. Detectives worked to piece together the events of that chaotic night. Witnesses were interviewed, shell casings were collected, and surveillance from nearby businesses was reviewed. Despite these efforts, the investigation struggled from the start. No solid leads emerged, and the identities of the shooters remained unknown. There were whispers and speculation rumors that the shooting was connected to an ongoing feud between rival gangs in the area, but nothing concrete could be confirmed. With no arrests and little progress, the case went cold. Then, in 2019, after nearly 3 decades of silence, the case received an unexpected breakthrough. The details surrounding this development were initially kept quiet, but it was enough to bring law enforcement back to the scene with fresh eyes and renewed determination. A Los Angeles County Sheriff's detective received a random phone call from a woman who claimed that her husband, currently incarcerated in another state, had information about a crime that took place in 1992. Intrigued but cautious, the detective arranged a phone conversation with the man. During their talk, the inmate revealed intimate and previously unknown details about the El Monte shooting, enough to warrant serious attention. The depth of the man's knowledge prompted the authorities to send another detective out of state to visit him in person. During that meeting, the inmate provided a clearer picture of the events that led up to the shooting. He also disclosed a connection to an attempted burglary at a gun shop in Rialto, an event that had not been linked to the case before. This new information stunned detectives, as it tied the El Monte shooting to a separate criminal act, revealing a broader pattern of behavior among those involved. What made the burglary especially significant was that it had been intercepted by police at the time, resulting in an officer-involved shooting. The detective, armed with this new lead, returned to Los Angeles with his colleague and contacted the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. They requested access to the firearm recovered during the 1992 burglary attempt. Once back at the lab, ballistics testing confirmed the unthinkable. The gun used during the gun shop burglary was the same weapon used in the drive-by shooting that ended Alin's life. The match was exact, down to the round removed from her forehead. The detectives worked quickly to identify those directly involved in the shooting. Their efforts led to a breakthrough in December of 2019, when they arrested David Ibarra and Raymond Gamez. Just weeks later, in January 2020, a third suspect, Gregory Montano, surrendered to the authorities. The men were just teenagers when the crime occurred. Montano and Gamez were only 15 years old, while Ibarra was 17. Due to their ages at the time of the offense, all three would be required to go through the juvenile court system. In 1992, the law treated juvenile offenders differently. 15-year-olds, regardless of the severity of their crimes, could not be tried as adults and would face a maximum of 2 years in juvenile detention. A 17-year-old, however, could be transferred to adult court and tried accordingly. But things had changed. Under a new directive issued by the district attorney's office, juvenile cases would no longer be transferred to adult court. As a result, Ibarra, who would have faced a more severe legal path in 1992, was instead treated the same as Montano and Gamez. In March 2021, the long-awaited trial began in juvenile court, nearly 29 years after Alin's life was cut short. The trial lasted 5 weeks and was unlike adult criminal proceedings. There was no jury, only a judge would decide the outcome. The courtroom was tense, filled with the quiet presence of Alin's family and those who had long sought accountability. When the trial concluded, the verdicts reflected the complexity of the case. Montano was acquitted and subsequently released. The judge found that there was not enough evidence to hold him responsible for the charges. Ibarra and Gamez, however, were both found guilty. They remain in county jail while the juvenile court determines their final disposition. The detective working the case later confirmed that the man who actually pulled the trigger that night was not among those convicted. He was an illegal immigrant at the time and is currently living in Mexico. An extradition request has been filed in hopes of bringing him to justice. Of the 7 other gang members involved in the incident, 2 have since passed away, and 1 is currently serving time in prison for unrelated crimes.